Imagine being a substitute teacher in a quiet high school, only to face a sudden lockdown because you let in a suspicious man. Sounds like something out of a scary story, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I was just filling in for a math teacher when everything spiraled out of control. It was a regular day, but little did I know, it was about to become one of those creepy encounters that you only hear about in horror stories. I was working as a substitute teacher at a high school just outside of Dallas, Texas. My job had me covering various classes, but math was my main gig. Most days were pretty routine, filled with teaching formulas and equations. One day, I was scheduled to cover 4 math classes with some free periods in between. It seemed like any other day, but there was an eerie feeling I couldn't shake off. Maybe it was just the thought of dealing with teenagers' ethics or the looming exams, but something felt off. During my free periods, I'd usually retreat to the teacher's lounge, a sanctuary from the chaos of the classroom. It was a place where we could unwind, chat, and share true stories about our worst teaching days. That day, I was flipping through a magazine, enjoying a rare moment of peace. I remember thinking how nice it was to have a break, unaware that this calm would soon be shattered. The lounge, usually a hub of gossip and laughter, felt oddly silent that day. I had just settled into my seat when there was a knock at the back door. It startled me because that door was hardly ever used. I glanced around, but the other teachers were engrossed in their own worlds. Curious, I got up to check it out. Standing there was a man, looking every bit like a teacher with his worn-out briefcase and disheveled tie. He introduced himself as Mr. James, saying he was new and had forgotten his ID. He seemed genuine enough, and I didn't think twice about it. Without verifying his story, I opened the door and let him in. He thanked me and walked away, heading towards the staff offices. It was only after he left that I started to feel uneasy. Something about his demeanor didn't sit right with me. I decided to check the staff list, just to be sure. To my horror, there was no Mr. James listed anywhere. Panic began to set in as I realized I might have made a grave mistake. As I sat there, my mind raced with all kinds of scary stories I'd heard over the years. My first thought was to alert the administration. I rushed to the principal's office and told them about the man I'd let in. They immediately called for a lockdown, and an announcement was made over the intercom. The entire school fell into an eerie silence, a stark contrast to the usual hustle and bustle. Doors were locked, lights were turned off, and students huddled under desks. I couldn't help but feel the weight of my decision, wondering if I had just put everyone in danger. The lockdown procedures were swift, and soon the hallways were empty, filled only with the echo of distant footsteps. I stayed close to the principal, watching as they checked the security cameras. There he was, the so-called Mr. James, wandering the corridors. He seemed to be looking for something or someone. The principal ordered all staff to remain vigilant and instructed security to find and apprehend him. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just another drill, this was the real deal, one of those real, life horror stories unfolding right before our eyes. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a loud commotion coming from the math wing. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that was where my next class was supposed to be. We could hear someone shouting, banging on doors, calling out a name. Sarah! He yelled over and over again. It sent chills down my spine. The name sounded familiar, but in the chaos, I couldn't place it. Security rushed toward the noise, and I followed at a safe distance, my curiosity piqued despite the fear gnawing at me. As we turned the corner, we saw him pounding on one of the classroom doors. He was frantic, almost manic, screaming for Sarah. The students inside were terrified, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Just then, the police arrived, guns drawn, and ordered him to the ground. It took a few tense moments, but they finally subdued him. He kept shouting for Sarah as they led him away in handcuffs. It was then that I realized he wasn't just some random intruder. He was Sarah's ex-husband, and who knows what could have happened if he had found her. The hallway was buzzing with the aftermath of the incident, students whispering, teachers trying to calm their nerves. I was left standing there, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. The police informed us that the man had a history of violence and had been looking for Sarah for months. They found a weapon in his briefcase, confirming our worst fears. It was a chilling realization that my one act of kindness could have led to something truly horrific. The reality of true crime stories had never felt so close to home. As the police escorted the man out, I caught a glimpse of Sarah. She had been hiding in a nearby classroom, tears streaming down her face. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I could see the gratitude and fear in her expression. It was clear she had been living a nightmare long before today. The thought of what might have happened if we hadn't acted quickly was haunting. The school had narrowly avoided a tragedy, but the emotional scars would linger for a long time. The night was dark, with shadows dancing under the moonlight. A disturbing sound echoed through the house, making every hair on my neck stand up. In the middle of the dark forest, an abandoned cabin hid terrifying secrets. I knew I shouldn't have entered, but something compelled me to discover what was behind that creaking door. As the door closed by itself, trapping us in the darkness, I felt a chill run down my spine. What would you do if the impossible became real? Mia and I had been in the library, working on our history project, when the announcement came over the intercom. This is not a drill. The school is now on lockdown. Follow lockdown procedures immediately. At first, I thought it was just another safety exercise, but the tension in the voice was undeniable. Mia, ever the imaginative one, immediately concocted a dozen theories, each more outlandish than the last. I, on the other hand, was convinced it was a simple misunderstanding. But as the minutes dragged on and the storm outside intensified, the reality of our situation began to sink in. The old library, with its creaking shelves and musty smell of ancient books, suddenly felt like a cage. We barricaded the door with whatever we could find, chairs, a heavy desk, and huddled together behind a row of bookshelves. Mia was clutching an old, leather-bound book she had found, her knuckles white. "You know about the spirit of the forest, right?" she whispered. I rolled my eyes, trying to keep my cool. "Not now, Mia." But she was insistent. According to local legend, a vengeful spirit roamed the woods surrounding our school, a remnant of a tragic past. I had always dismissed these tales as nonsense, but tonight, with the power out and the storm raging, even I felt a shiver of unease. Suddenly, the lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. "Liam," Mia whispered, "do you see that?" She pointed towards the window. Through the flashes of lightning, I saw a figure standing motionless at the edge of the forest, just beyond the school grounds. My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be the intruder, or was Mia's ghostly tale coming to life? The tension was unbearable. We heard footsteps echoing in the hallway, growing louder and more menacing. I grabbed a heavy book, ready to defend us if necessary. The door handle rattled, and a low, guttural sound came from the other side. Mia and I exchanged terrified glances. "It's him," she mouthed, clutching her book tighter. The door began to shake violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to break through. In a moment of sheer panic, I shouted, "Go away." But the only response was a sinister laugh that sent chills down my spine. We sat there in the darkness, our breaths shallow and fast. The rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled like a tormented spirit. Every creak of the building, every flicker of lightning made us jump. I could see the fear in Mia's eyes, reflecting my own. The legends she loved to tell suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. The figure outside hadn't moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us, waiting. The noise outside the door suddenly stopped. We could hear nothing but the pounding of our hearts and the relentless storm outside. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn again, this time without the violent shaking. It was almost as if whatever was out there was toying with us, enjoying our terror. I held the book high, ready to strike. The door creaked open a fraction, and a cold draft swept into the room, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. Mia squeezed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Liam," she breathed, "we have to do something." I nodded, my mind racing. In that moment, I remembered the back door of the library, a seldom used exit that led directly into the forest. It was our only chance. We moved as silently as possible, inching our way towards the back, every shadow seeming to reach out for us. Just as we reached the door, a deafening crash came from the front. The figure had finally broken through. We burst out into the storm, the cold rain soaking us instantly. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. But it was our only option. We ran, the wind tearing at our clothes, the rain blinding us. As we stumbled through the trees, I glanced back and saw the figure standing at the edge of the forest, its form barely visible through the sheets of rain. It didn't follow us, but I felt its eyes on me, a promise of future encounters. We didn't stop running until we reached the road, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone. The next day, the news reported an intruder at the school, but no one could explain the mysterious figure or the strange occurrences. Mia looked at me, her eyes reflecting my own lingering fear. "Maybe some legends are true after all," she whispered. And as much as I wanted to disagree, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out of that storm, something that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The school lockdown had just started, and the storm outside was raging. A disturbing sound echoed through the library, making every hair on my neck stand up. Mia's eyes met mine, wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Her voice trembling. We were not alone, and whatever was out there was coming closer. Mia and I had been in the library, working on our history project, when the announcement came over the intercom. "This is not a drill. The school is now on lockdown. Follow lockdown procedures immediately." At first, I thought it was just another safety exercise, but the tension in the voice was undeniable. Mia, ever the imaginative one, immediately concocted a dozen theories, each more outlandish than the last. I, on the other hand, was convinced it was a simple misunderstanding. But as the minutes dragged on and the storm outside intensified, the reality of our situation began to sink in. The old library, with its creaking shelves and musty smell of ancient books, suddenly felt like a cage. We barricaded the door with whatever we could find, chairs, a heavy desk, and huddled together behind a row of bookshelves. Mia was clutching an old, leather-bound book she had found, her knuckles white. "You know about the escaped convict, right?" she whispered. I rolled my eyes, trying to keep my cool. "Not now, Mia." But she was insistent. According to the news, a dangerous convict had escaped from a nearby prison and was last seen heading towards our town. I had always dismissed these stories as exaggerated, but tonight, with the power out and the storm raging, even I felt a shiver of unease. Suddenly, the lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. "Laurie," Mia whispered, "do you see that?" She pointed towards the window. Through the flashes of lightning, I saw a figure standing motionless at the edge of the forest, just beyond the school grounds. My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be the convict, or was my imagination playing tricks on me? The tension was unbearable. We heard footsteps echoing in the hallway, growing louder and more menacing. I grabbed a heavy book, ready to defend us if necessary. The door handle rattled, and a low, guttural sound came from the other side. Mia and I exchanged terrified glances. "It's him," she mouthed, clutching her book tighter. The door began to shake violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to break through. In a moment of sheer panic, I shouted, "Go away." But the only response was a sinister laugh that sent chills down my spine. We sat there in the darkness, our breaths shallow and fast. The rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled like a tormented spirit. Every creak of the building, every flicker of lightning made us jump. I could see the fear in Mia's eyes, reflecting my own. The stories she loved to tell suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. The figure outside hadn't moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us, waiting. The noise outside the door suddenly stopped. We could hear nothing but the pounding of our hearts and the relentless storm outside. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn again, this time without the violent shaking. It was almost as if whoever was out there was toying with us, enjoying our terror. I held the book high, ready to strike. The door creaked open a fraction, and a cold draft swept into the room, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. Mia squeezed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Laurie," she breathed, "we have to do something." I nodded, my mind racing. In that moment, I remembered the back door of the library, a seldom used exit that led directly into the forest. It was our only chance. We moved as silently as possible, inching our way towards the back, every shadow seeming to reach out for us. Just as we reached the door, a deafening crash came from the front. The figure had finally broken through. We burst out into the storm, the cold rain soaking us instantly. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. But it was our only option. We ran, the wind tearing at our clothes, the rain blinding us. The path through the forest was treacherous, and the mud sucked at our shoes, making every step a struggle. Branches whipped at our faces, and the roar of the storm drowned out all other sounds. We didn't dare look back, but I could feel the figure's presence, relentless and unyielding, just behind us. We stumbled through the trees, finally emerging onto the main road. As we reached the safety of the road, we saw the flashing lights of police cars in the distance. We flagged them down, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone. The police took us to safety, assuring us that the lockdown had ended and the school was secure. The next day, the news reported the capture of the convict, found not far from our school. The lockdown had kept everyone else safe, but the police mentioned the convict had specifically been looking for 2 students rumored to have evidence that could incriminate him. Mia looked at me, her eyes reflecting my own lingering fear. "Maybe some stories are true after all," she whispered. And as much as I wanted to disagree, I couldn't shake the feeling that something very real had followed. The school was busy with the usual morning chatter when the intercom crackled to life, the voice shaking, "Attention all students and staff, we are now on lockdown. This is not a drill." Instantly, the hallways fell silent, the weight of fear pressing down on us like a heavy fog. The familiar sounds of laughter and conversation were replaced by the eerie silence of anticipation. I was sitting in history class, doodling in my notebook, when the announcement came. Emma, our class president, shot up from her seat, her face determined. Mr. Harris, our history teacher, immediately locked the door and instructed everyone to get down and stay quiet. The shadows from the old arches of our century-old school seemed to stretch and grow, wrapping us in an almost tangible fear. The room felt colder, the old wooden desks and high windows adding to the heavy atmosphere. Emma moved among us, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow against the backdrop of our collective fear. Her presence was calming, but the anxiety in the room was strong. Mr. Harris's eyes darted around the room, the calm vigilance of a soldier clear on his face. He had seen combat before, and it showed in the way he carried himself, a silent guardian in the midst of our panic. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and deliberate, each step a drumbeat of impending doom. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Memories of the past incident flashed through my mind, each one a spike of terror. Mr. Harris motioned for silence, his eyes hardening into a steely resolve as the footsteps grew closer. The sound of a door creaking open nearby sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on our door. Emma grabbed a baseball bat she had hidden in her locker earlier that week, just in case. Mr. Harris positioned himself near the door, holding a chair as a makeshift weapon. The intruder's shadow loomed larger and larger as they tried to force the door open. The room was filled with the sound of our collective breathing, shallow and quick, as we waited for whatever was to come. The door creaked under the pressure, splinters flying as it burst open with a deafening crash. A figure stumbled into the room, a former student with eyes wild and frantic, the embodiment of rage and desperation. He brandished a weapon, shouting incoherently about past wrongs. Emma, her face set with grim determination, swung her bat with a sickening thud, connecting with the intruder's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor as Mr. Harris tackled him, the two of them hitting the ground with a bone-jarring thump. We held our breath until the sound of sirens signaled the arrival of help. The intensity of the moment hit its peak as the intruder, struggling against Mr. Harris's grip, screamed about his grievances. The room was a blur of motion and noise, our fear and adrenaline mixing into a surreal experience. Emma stood over them, her bat ready for another swing if necessary, her hands shaking but her resolve unbroken. The police burst in, shouting commands and quickly subduing the intruder. As the officers took him away, his shouts faded into the background, replaced by the sounds of our collective sighs of relief. The tension that had gripped us so tightly began to loosen, but the memory of his wild eyes and desperate words lingered. We were safe, but the school had been changed forever by the events that had just unfolded. The police stormed the building shortly after, their shouts echoing through the corridors as they took the intruder into custody. The lockdown was lifted, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the school like a wave. But the fear remained, a stark reminder of our fragility. As we gathered our things, the weight of what had happened settling over us, Emma looked at me, her eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and firm resolve. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice a lifeline. And in that moment, I believed her, drawing strength from her unwavering determination. The hallways were a mess of scattered belongings and overturned desks, evidence of our frantic attempts to find safety. The once familiar walls now seemed to hold shadows that seemed permanent. As we filed out of the building, the cold air outside felt like a shock to the system, a stark contrast to the stifling fear we had felt inside. We watched as the police cars and ambulances lined the street, lights flashing in a dizzying array of red and blue. Parents arrived, their faces a mix of worry and relief as they hugged their children tightly. The reality of what had happened began to sink in, and I found myself clinging to the small comforts of normalcy, like the touch of my mother's hand and the warmth of my jacket. In the days that followed, the school worked to return to a semblance of normalcy, but the incident had left a lasting mark. Emma and Mr. Harris were hailed as heroes, their quick thinking and bravery credited with saving countless lives. But for those of us who had lived through it, the true heroes were each other, the friends who had held our hands, the teachers who had protected us, and the strangers who had become our allies in the face of danger. As I lay in bed that night, the events replayed in my mind, a loop of fear and relief. I knew that we had been lucky, that things could have ended very differently. But as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to Emma's words. We would get through this. Together, we would find a way to move forward, to reclaim our sense of safety and normalcy, one day at a time. You ever find yourself trapped in a place you thought you knew every inch of, only to discover it's hiding more secrets than you could ever imagine? The rain poured heavily outside as we sat in the school auditorium, rehearsing for our play. Suddenly, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention all students and staff, this is a lockdown. This is not a drill." My heart pounded as the auditorium doors slammed shut. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back, and my hands began to shake. The afternoon had begun like any other. Greenfield High's auditorium buzzed with excitement as we prepared for our upcoming theater production. I, Christine, the 15-year-old editor of the school newspaper, was busy documenting the behind-the-scenes chaos. Our stern but fair Principal Harris, a man with a military-like precision in his demeanor, oversaw everything from the stage, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Little did we know, our lives were about to take a terrifying turn. Principal Harris, despite his strict exterior, was well respected by students and staff alike. He had a reputation for keeping the school running smoothly, and his background in the military often showed in his methodical approach to any crisis. I admired him for his calm under pressure, a trait that would soon be tested in ways none of us could have imagined. The lockdown announcement echoed through the room, freezing us all in place. Principal Harris quickly took charge, directing everyone to stay calm and find cover. "Christine, get over here," he commanded, his voice steady but urgent. As we huddled behind the stage props, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. My curiosity got the better of me, and I began to piece together clues from past incidents and recent odd occurrences at the school. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as hours passed. Principal Harris and I decided to explore the back rooms of the auditorium for potential escape routes. We stumbled upon an old storage room filled with props and forgotten scripts. Among the dust-covered papers, we found a series of notes detailing a past incident similar to our current predicament. Another school had faced a chemical threat years ago, but the details were hushed up. The musty smell of the room mixed with the distant sound of the rain added to the eerie feeling. As we delved deeper into the notes, it became clear that the past incident was not merely a coincidence. The descriptions of symptoms and panic mirrored what we were experiencing. Principal Harris's face grew more serious as he read through the documents. "This can't be happening again," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Our investigation was abruptly interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. We hid, barely breathing, as a shadowy figure passed by. The dim light from the hallway cast long, menacing shadows on the walls. It was then that Principal Harris whispered the chilling truth. This isn't the first time Greenfield has faced a threat like this. We need to find out who's behind this and why. My heart raced as we formulated a plan to confront the intruder and uncover the source of the chemical threat. We managed to track the figure to the science lab, where we discovered a makeshift lab setup and various chemicals. The sight of it all sent chills down my spine. Suddenly, the figure turned to face us. Principal Harris's expression turned from shock to recognition. It was Mr. Thompson, the chemistry teacher, who had been working on experiments unauthorized by the school. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing?" Principal Harris demanded, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Mr. Thompson's eyes darted around the room, his hands trembling as he tried to hide the evidence. "You don't understand," he stammered. "I was trying to protect us, to find a solution." The tension in the room was palpable as Mr. Thompson explained his actions. He had discovered a series of chemical compounds that could potentially neutralize a wide range of toxins, but his experiments were far from complete. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he pleaded. "I was only trying to help." Principal Harris and I were faced with a difficult decision. We needed to contain the situation before it escalated further, but we also had to ensure the safety of everyone in the school. Working together, we managed to secure the lab and contact the authorities. The police arrived shortly after, taking Mr. Thompson into custody. The lockdown was lifted, but the scars of the night remained. Greenfield High would never be the same. The next day, as I wrote my article for the school paper, I reflected on the night's events. We had faced our fears and uncovered the truth, proving that even in the face of terror, courage and determination could lead to justice. The auditorium, once a place of creativity and joy, now held a darker memory, but it also stood as a testament to our resilience. In the following weeks, the school community worked together to heal. Counselors were brought in to help students cope with the trauma, and safety protocols were reviewed and improved. Principal Harris held a special assembly to address the events, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and preparedness. His words resonated with us all. We must learn from this experience and remain strong, not just as individuals, but as a community. For me, the ordeal had been a harsh lesson in the realities of life and the complexities of human nature. Writing about it was therapeutic, allowing me to process my emotions and understand the depth of the situation. My article, titled "The Night Greenfield Stood Still," captured the essence of our collective experience: fear, confusion, and ultimately, hope. As I walked through the halls of Greenfield High, I noticed how things had changed. The familiar faces of friends and teachers carried a new weight, a shared understanding of what we had endured. The school was more than just a building, it was a symbol of our strength and unity. And in that unity, I found a renewed sense of purpose and determination. We had survived the lockdown, but more importantly, we had come together in the face of adversity. Greenfield High was forever altered, but it was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. And as I looked around at my fellow students, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, just as we had on that fateful night. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.